Hey guys, I have been wanting to do videos and YouTube videos, and since the only people watching right now are people who love me, you probably already know that. And so I decided eventually I'll get around to making an introductory video and a beautiful video. But this year has been full of so much learning, and I would just hate to not start because I couldn't start perfectly. And I think that that is what my garden has taught me the most this year. It's just to start, even if it's not right. And that's what I want to talk about today. The truth is, this year I've made a lot of mistakes, and the biggest and most frustrating mistake is my tomato plants, which kills me to say because it was the thing I was most excited about. As you can see in my garden here, I have cattle panels everywhere for the sole purpose of growing tomatoes and beans and peas and things that climb up trellises. But my tomato plants, well, they got out of control. So as you can see, my tomato plants are laying on the ground. I have 3.5 rows of tomato plants that are laying on the ground. It's pretty easy to explain what happened, what went wrong with my tomato plants. We went on a couple trips, and unfortunately, I couldn't keep up with my garden this year. This is the first year we've had a garden basically ever. We had a smaller one in the front, which inspired me that I could garden, but nothing like this. In fact, I'm guessing you probably haven't seen my garden at all, so maybe let's show you that now. My garden is split into 2 halves. The first half is on the right side, and I have 5 rows over there. And the second half is over here on the left side, where I have 6 rows, and eventually I'll have 7. It's massive. But the truth is, a garden this size would be hard for anyone to keep up with, regardless of whether or not you're a seasoned gardener. And it's just me most of the time. Now, that doesn't mean that Eric doesn't help out. And of course, the kids love being in the garden. But the truth is, keeping on top of the tomatoes was my responsibility, and I let it get out of control. So here are some things that I will do next year to make sure that my tomatoes are great. Number 1, I'll be sorting my tomatoes by style. So all my cherry tomatoes will be in one place, all my red tomatoes will be in another place, all my beefsteak tomatoes will be in another space, and they'll be sorted that way to help me know what kind of tomatoes I'm harvesting, so how I'll use them. The next thing I'll do is I'll make sure to stay on top of pruning. I have a feeling that's something that I'm going to be saying for a couple years, but I'm hoping that this is the first and last time I say, oh, I'm going to keep on top of pruning, because honestly, that's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. Right now, I can't walk down my rows. Do you see all of that right there? That's supposed to be a wood chip path, but it's not, because I have tomatoes laying down in the middle, and not just tomatoes. Another massive mistake that I made in my garden was planting watermelons in the rows rather than a watermelon bed. And to be honest, I did this with my watermelon and my squash. So I'm just gonna kind of lump those things together. Next year, I'll have a watermelon patch and a summer squash patch and a winter squash patch, because as it stands right now, my winter squash and my summer squash are together, which has caused some confusion and many melons to get much, many squash, I should say, to get much larger than they should be because I didn't know what they were supposed to be. I'll do better with that next year. I also want to try rotational gardening because that should help keep any squash bugs at bay. And we didn't notice any squash bugs in this area until like July. And by then our squash plants were big enough that they could withstand the squash bugs and they didn't kill everything. But they're going to lay their eggs into my ground, and regardless of what I do to mitigate the squash bugs this year, I'm going to have a problem with them next year. So next year, my squash will probably be in the front where they'll be far away from the baby squash bug larvae, and hopefully that will help keep my plants healthy. The next thing that I did wrong is these peas. They're honestly just starting to come in, and that's partially, and they're clearly having some problems. Let's see if I can get that to, nope. That's partially because I just planted them too close together. These are so close together. In fact, the vines on these plants are insane, and they're already covered in lots of different blight. I guess it's just one type of blight, but it's sad and sick and dying, and the beans or peas that I'm getting off of them aren't as good as they could be. Although they're still pretty good. Next mistake I made was planting tomatillos and ground cherries. Okay, I said it. I don't like them. I know that's crazy. And I know some of you are saying, oh, you haven't had them this way. And you're absolutely right. I haven't had them your way, but I don't like them raw. Fortunately, we've been selling boxes, which means we'll be able to give away tons of these tomatillos in those boxes. I'm gonna finish my pea and I'll be right back. This is a bean. The next thing that I'm going to do differently next year is have my beds dedicated to one plant. This year I thought it would be cool to try to stagger my plants, which in theory, I don't see why it doesn't work. But in execution, plants are bigger and wilder than we give them credit for. And here is a prime example. In this bed, I have squash, but I also have 50 eggplants. You guessed it. I can't find most of my eggplants, and that's really disappointing because I really love eggplants. Not to eat, but to look at. We're still working on finding recipes for all of these plants that we want to eat, but we don't eat. One thing that I'll do better next year is plant more of these. These are called, what are these called? Oh no, noodle beans. These are called noodle beans, and they're fantastic. Look at how long they are. These are my favorites, and I'm so glad that I got 2 plants, but my goal is to have an entire arch full of these. Pepper plants. Some of my pepper plants did really good this year, and some of them did really badly. And I was trying to think what the difference is. And the difference really is the ones that did well were constantly uppotted, and honestly, I planted them way too early. I started planting my peppers in January or February, and I couldn't plant out until the beginning of May, like halfway through May actually. So by the time I planted a good portion of these pepper plants, they had been uppotted like 2 or 3 times. Now, it's not the best, but they were big and they've produced. And as you can see, they're big here. But some of my pepper plants, well, they didn't grow up. I think that's a good lesson for life. Sometimes we're moved too soon or not soon enough. We're not given room to grow. And it stunts us a little bit. But I want you to notice something, even on these little pepper plants. They still have fruit. I've learned a lot gardening this year. I've learned a lot about who I am and who I want to be. I've learned that this is a passion that I didn't know I had because the garden wasn't something I knew I needed. But it is something. I think it goes back to the Bible. We were created to be in a garden. But not everyone has that opportunity. Life is busy. I'm a mom and I work full time. If anyone understands that life is busy, it's me. So, because I believe we were created to be in a garden, I want to invite you into mine. It's messy and it's crazy, and half the time I'm doing things totally wrong in a hilariously tragic way, but it's my garden and I love it, and you can love it too. The garden will teach you that life goes on, and more importantly, it wants to go on. That's a zucchini and it's on my trellis. So, if you love gardens, if you want to love gardens, or if you just found yourself in a place where you need some extra grace, I want you to come into my garden, however often you can, and learn whatever lessons you can, whether it's through this YouTube channel or you knocking on my door and asking me to walk through my garden. And it will always teach you something. I promise. And I can promise you that because it always teaches me something. It's teaching me grace for myself. It's teaching me unimaginable strength for myself. It taught me to go and dream bigger than I ever thought was possible. It taught me that within myself I have a strength that I had forgotten about. And it taught me how to be a better person every single day. It'll do all of that for you too. Are you ready?